Good morning. Hi there, everybody. Welcome to Thursday. Thank you so much for joining me today. And it's good to see all of you. I can't see you, obviously, but you can see me. And I'm excited to be here with you as we continue our journey through Pirkei Avot, the ethics of our fathers. And today we're going to complete chapter 1. We're going to finish the last few Mishnayot, the last few Mishnahs of chapter 1. And then on Thursday, I'm going to introduce you to a few of my favorite Mishnahs from the rest of this chapter, Pirkei Avot, or the rest of this Mishnah, Pirkei Avot. It's a little bit confusing because the whole thing is called the Mishnah, and then each little section is called the Mishnah. So, what can I say? We're going to begin with our prayer for studying Torah. And as I've said in the past, to me, Torah doesn't just mean the Torah, but it means anytime we gather together to study something of Jewish and text content. So let's join together. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. We praise you, Adonai, our God, sovereign of the world, who sanctifies us with your commandments and commands us in the immersion of Torah, into the study and the immersion of Torah. Okay, so on Tuesday, we talked about the fact that we were done talking about these pairs of rabbis, and the last pair was probably the most famous, Hillel and Shammai. And then on Tuesday, we also were introduced to Rabban Gamliel. And Rabban, as opposed to Rabbi, is an honorific that was only accorded to a few of the rabbis. He was the grandson of Hillel, and that title was reserved for the patriarchs from Hillel's family, Rabban Gamliel. So, and we're going to hear more about his son and grandson coming up. And Rabban Gamliel was the one who said, appoint for yourself a teacher, which sounds very much like what we heard earlier on, acquire for yourself a teacher. Avoid doubt, meaning don't guess at things, make sure you're accurate. And if you are not sure, find out from somebody who knows. And that's why you need a teacher, in order to verify the information, because you don't want to give a wrong answer that could potentially lead someone into doing something that could possibly be a sin. And on the other hand, you don't want to give an answer that might prevent them from doing something that is actually okay to do. So it works both ways. And then finally, Gamliel said, do not make a habit of tithing by guesswork. Now, the ancient tithe was giving of 10% of one's income, whether that be produce or land or whatever it might be, depending upon what one's vocation was, to the high priest. There was 10% given to the priest. There was another 10% given to the Levites, because, of course, they had no income. And so they derived their income through the generosity of the Israelites who made sacrifices, and part of that was given to them. First, the fruits of the harvest were given to the priests and the Levites, and so on. And you're supposed to give 10%, Eser, Eser Rishon and Eser Sheni. That's the first 10% and the second 10%. And you're not supposed to guess at it. It's supposed to be either more or exactly the amount. So I kind of likened it to, the IRS. You don't say, well, I think I'm about in a 20%, 25% tax bracket, so I'll pay you this much this year. Doesn't work that way. It has to be more exacting. And so when those tithes are given, a person is really supposed to be giving exactly that 10% or more if they're able to, and not guess at it. So this is one of those areas in which you don't want to be in doubt. You have to carefully check and make sure that you are doing the right thing. All right, so that was a little bit of a review from last Tuesday from Rabbi Gamliel. And now I'm going to introduce you to Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, the elder. And so even though he has the title, the elder, he is the son of Rabban Gamliel, whom we just spoke about. So he is Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, the elder. And why the elder? Because he's going to have a son as well that we're going to talk about. So Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, he is referred to in the Mishnah that we're going to read simply as Shimon, because he is Rabban Gamliel's eldest son, and he's going to be called Shimon. And he was the head of the Sanhedrin, which of course was the judicial body at the time. It was the body of rabbis that made decisions about judicial things that were brought to them along with Jewish practice, because they were in charge right around the time of the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem. And when there's no more priesthood, and so the priestly cult is not running things, somebody's got to make some decisions. And maybe the reason that he's referred to here as his son, meaning Rabban Gamliel's son, and not with the title specifically of Rabban, is that he made this particular statement. When he made this particular statement, he was younger. And so, he might not have been considered a seasoned sage yet, worthy of the title of Rabban. So he's known as Shimon. And this is the first case in the book of Pirkei Avot where a son's statements follow directly his father's. Most rabbis did not inherit their positions from their fathers. They had to earn those positions on their own. There was no inheritance like there was in the priesthood. So this is one of the few occasions on which we see a patriarch, namely Rabban Gamliel, actually having his son inherit that patriarchy and title onto his son Shimon. So now we're going to look at specifically what he said, and I think that this is going to be an interesting one for you to learn. So this is what Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel used to say, or Shimon. Shimon, his son, used to say, "All my days I grew up among the sages, and I have found nothing better for a person than silence. Study is not the most important thing, but actions. Whoever indulges in too many words brings about sin." Now this is a really interesting statement. Remember, Shimon is the son of Rabban Gamliel, and when he says all his days he grew up among the sages, he probably did. His dad took him to work. It was the first ever Take Your Kid to Work program. And so he would sit there and, like a little sponge, listen. And the fact that he says, "I found nothing better for a person than silence," is kind of interesting to me. But these three statements he makes, they all have kind of a common element. A person should say little and do much, which is basically the same lesson that Shammai taught us in an earlier Mishnah. And perhaps Shimon's praise of silence might explain why so few of his statements were preserved. Maybe he was chided when he was a kid for speaking out of turn when he was sitting with his dad and the other sages listening to them study. And he's a man of few words. We don't have a lot of Mishnayot from him. So maybe he didn't say that much. And there are different ways of understanding his praise of silence. One understanding is that when others verbally abuse you, the best defense is to remain silent. If you answer and get into a discussion and a conflict, this will inevitably escalate and lead to additional, possibly being chastised additionally. So that's one understanding, and that's kind of controversial advice, and certainly sometimes it's not best to just be quiet, but there are times when it is best to hold one's peace. Just don't say anything. Not respond to the other person with more verbal abuse, because that is a game that you can't win. It's going to go back and forth and back and forth. And everyone knows that, when you get involved in a shouting match, neither side's going to win. So often, the best way to diffuse a difficult situation is just kind of gird your loins, gather your inner strength, and remain quiet. Another understanding of his first statement is that silence is a way in which a person might be considered to be more intelligent. Once you open your mouth, the world knows. But often by being silent, it's a little more mysterious. People don't really know what's going on in your mind. You have an opportunity to keep people guessing, and so on. So even if a person is not necessarily intelligent, by remaining quiet and not being obvious about who they are, they come across as being more intelligent. So even an intelligent person, the more they talk, the more foolish sometimes they might be considered. So Shimon clearly sides on other things, or he is on the side of action. Don't talk about it, do it. He was a walk the walk kind of guy, not a talk the talk kind of guy. And for a person who learns but does not fulfill the commandments which they're learning, they might not, he feels they probably shouldn't have learned them at all. Because if you're not going to learn the commandments, learn the halakha, learn the Torah, and then go on to actually implement what you're learning, what good is the learning? So Shimon was really a man who believed in action, and he sides with action versus over-talking. And according to Shimon, the purpose of study is that action. So he doesn't discount the value of studying, but rather the value of the studying is then to lead to action. Put it into action in the world. Let's see it manifest in the world. So on the last statement of Shimon, there's a commentator by the name of Rabbeinu Jonah. He was a medieval Spanish commentator, and he makes an interesting note. He says, people have 2 ears and only 1 tongue. And you've heard this before, but you didn't know that it came from a medieval Spanish interpreter, commentator by the name of Rabbeinu Yonah. He says, people have 2 ears and 1 mouth. That is to teach that a person should hear twice as much as what that person says. And I think we all know people in our lives who possibly think they have 2 mouths and 1 ear because they behave in that manner. So I love what Shimon had to say. We get a sense of who he was, sitting at the feet of these sages as a kid, listening to what they had to say, not opening his mouth because he knew he might be chastised, and then realizing that you keep yourself a mystery when you don't say a lot, but you really tell the world who you are through your actions. So He learned well from his father, Rabban Gamliel, and Shimon, his son. And now finally, believe it or not, we are moving on to the 18th Mishnah of chapter 1 of Pirkei Avot. And this is the last Mishnah. There are 18 Mishnayot in this chapter, chapter 1. And we're going to finish this up today. And then on Tuesday of next week, we're going to do some of Rabbi Leah's favorites. Okay? So here's who we're introduced to in chapter 1, Mishnah 18. We are now going to be introduced to another Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, but in this Mishnah, this is not the same person as the Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel that we just saw in the previous Mishnah, but rather his grandson. So it was customary to name children, especially boys, for their fathers. So it was Rabban Gamliel, and then Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, and then another Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel. And in fact, the Sephardic custom, which is where these rabbis hailed from, Babylonia, the land of Israel, and so on. In other words, the Oriental lands, Egypt, Algiers, what else am I thinking of? Iraq and Iran. The Sephardic custom is to name children for the parent. Now, that's not the Ashkenazi custom. The Ashkenazi custom, of course, is to name a child for a deceased relative, to honor a deceased relative. So we have two very distinct customs, one in the Ashkenazi, which came much later, and this one in the Sephardic custom, where the child, particularly the sons, the grandsons, are named for a living parent. So he was, as I said, the son of Rabban Gamliel of Yavna, and he was a patriarch, considered a patriarch, which is why he has that title Rabban, after the Bar Kokhba revolt. Now, the Bar Kokhba revolt took place between 132 and 135 of the Common Era. And Bar Kokhba was a military leader who led a revolt against the Romans. And it was a successful revolt. Unfortunately, it was one of many battles and revolts, and he had tens of thousands of soldiers who were under his command. But unfortunately, winning the battles doesn't win the war. So the Romans remained in power. And of course, if you look at the year, this took place about 65 years after the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem, when the Israelites were still trying to retake Jerusalem from the Romans. So although Bar Kokhba was successful in the battle and in this revolt, it did not bring Jerusalem back to the Jews. Equally as important as who this Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel's father and grandfather were, are who his son is. Because this Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel is going to be the father of Rabbi Judah Hanasi, also known as Rabbi Judah, also known as Rabbi Judah the Prince, and also known as Rabbi, because he was that important. And it was Rabbi Judah Hanasi who edited the Mishnah, who finally took all of the rules, all of the mitzvot, and put them into an easily readable and indexed form, so that once the temple in Jerusalem was destroyed, the rabbis were able to continue to perform the mitzvot in their time and their day, but always with an eye on the hope, the promise and the hope that the temple would be rebuilt in Jerusalem. To this day, it has still not been rebuilt, but they never gave up the hope that that would eventually happen again. So here is what Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel used to say. And the formula for this is going to sound familiar to you. On three things does the world stand: on justice, on truth, and on peace. As it is said, execute the judgment of truth and peace in your gates. Now, it's kind of interesting that this is the last Mishnah of this first chapter. And one of the first Mishnahs that we read in this chapter was of Shimon the righteous. He was that last remnant of the great assembly of rabbis. He lived in the first, before the first century, way before the first century of the Common Era. So here we are now, several hundred years later, with Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel saying, the world stands on three things. And we're getting ready to hear Al HaTorah, V'al HaAvodah, V'al Gimilut Chasadim. But that was Shimon the righteous. Now we have the rabbis saying the world stands on justice, on truth, and peace, as it is said, execute the judgment of truth and peace in your gates. So we have tzedek, emet, v'shalom. Tzedek, justice, truth, emet, and shalom, peace. So, as I said, this is a very close Mishnaic style to Mishnah 2 in the beginning of the chapter, and it's not accidental. It ties things together. And the editor of the Mishnah, Yehuda Hanassi, chose to begin and end this unit of Pirkei Avot with similar language and style because, as we talked about, anytime we have repetition, that aids in our memory. So this type of literary structure, this things happening in threes and things being similar to other things, is not an unusual structure. And there may be some differences in the actual words of the two Mishnahs. And some of the other versions of this Mishnah that we read say, does the world exist? It doesn't say the world stands, but it says the world exists. And there is a commentator, the Meiri, who says that the difference is that in Mishnah 2, the early one we read by Shimon the righteous, that three things without which the world would crumble: Torah, temple service, and the practice of tikkun olam, acts of righteous piety. This Mishnah teaches that things that without which the world couldn't stand, but the political and social structure would actually fall apart. So without justice, without truth, without peace, the world is really in full danger of anarchy. So justice, the rabbis also stated that any judge who judges correctly is a partner in creation with God. That's pretty incredible. That the justice which God shows and exemplifies, that as human beings, if we also exemplify justice in our daily dealings, if we treat people in a just manner and truthfully and so on, we are emulating God in that kind of behavior. Creating a just world is considered one of the responsibilities of all human beings, not just of Jews, but of Jews and non-Jews alike, in continuing the act of creation of God by dealing justly with our fellow human being. And others understand this as a recognition of God's behavior. So we are doing God's behavior in this world, in this time, right now. Peace. Well, without peace, even if a person has personal wealth, has material things, has even health, if there is no peace, if there is no real peace in the world, and if there is no physical peace within one's soul, you're not able to enjoy whatever you might have. And particularly with the non-existence of real peace, meaning war, war and strife, that's going to tear life apart completely. Because you could be wealthy, you could have a fabulous job, you could have a beautiful home, but war is one of those great levelers that will tear all of that apart. So this statement can also be understood as peace between the people of Israel and among the people of Israel. And we did read a Mishnah about that in Mishnah 12, where we have to be concerned about peace among people. And that's why one of the rabbis was seen to be like Aaron, Moses' brother, who was seen as the great peacemaker, who would go to one person and say, so-and-so is so bereft because you had a fight and they want to make up with you. And then he would go to the other person and say, so-and-so is so bereft because you've had a fight and they want to make up with you. When really neither one has said that, but it was Aaron's way of getting people together. So we are supposed to exemplify Aaron as a great peacemaker among peoples. And that is one of the greatest gifts, is to be able to make peace between one person and another human being. So the Palestinian Talmud, also known as the Jerusalem Talmud, is different from the Babylonian Talmud in that one was produced in Babylonia and the other one was produced in Israel. It's called the Yerushalmi, as opposed to the Bavli, which is the Babylonian Talmud. And there are some distinct differences, but also an incredible number of similarities, which, given that the rabbis weren't on Zoom together, putting these two documents together, the similarities are really quite remarkable. So the Palestinian Talmud also comments that all three of these are connected, because if there is justice, there's going to be truth. And if there are truth and justice, there's going to be peace. So that is why all three of these are spoken to us by Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, the grandson of the first Rabban Gamliel, the son of the next Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, and very importantly, the father of Rabbi Judah Hanasi, who eventually, around the year 250 of the Common Era, is going to edit and codify this entire Mishnah. Not just Pirkei Avot, but the whole Mishnah. So, Mazel Tov, Kol HaKavod. We have finished the first chapter of Pirkei Avot. We went through it pretty methodically, but I hope you learned a lot. And we're done with today's lesson for now, but on Tuesday of next week, what I'll be doing is bringing you some of Rav Leah's favorites to study. And these come from a variety of the rest of the chapters. That's going to be on Tuesday. And then on Thursday, for Chai There with Rabbi Leah, we're going to be doing a Shavuot study as we get ready for the holiday next week. Shavuot starts Thursday night. We'll be doing blessings. You'll be having a lovely meal. Friday morning of next week, there will be a Shavuot service. Friday evening, Shabbat blessings, and Saturday morning, a regular Shabbat service, followed that night with Havdalah. So we got a lot coming up. Continue to check your schedule. Let your friends know who aren't watching this particular broadcast. But I'll see you again tomorrow evening for Shabbat blessings at 4:45. And until then, I'll say lehitraot. Bye-bye.